Hello and welcome. This is the August 26, 2020 Creating Growth Successful Parenting Group. Your hosts are Jacqueline Rhew and Robin Choquette. Jacqueline and Robin are co-authors of the Successful Parenting Workbook. Combined, they have over 35 years working with professionals and parents. They have provided over 400 trainings both locally and nationally on a wide array of topics relating to parenting strategies and raising resilient children through goal-directed parenting. Their approach to purposeful parenting has helped hundreds of parents develop plans that are unique to their families, as well as gain confidence in their parenting strategies, which leads to a healthy and successful young adult. Dr. Patrick McGrath is the guest expert for this group. Anxiety and what you should know will be the focus of the discussion. Dr. McGrath is the head of the clinical services at NOCD and the president of the Anxiety Centers of Illinois. He is the author of the OCD Answer Book and Don't Try Harder, Try Different. Enjoy, and remember, follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Never be on. And one of the things I recommended, and Patrick, tell me what you think, I recommended not having it be so black and white, but saying, yes, it's difficult for them to have their screens on. We need to develop a plan so that they transition slowly into having the screens on. Maybe having some of it, and Patrick, can you speak to this a little bit?
Absolutely. When I look at those plans, my goal is, here's the plan that starts, but that's hopefully not the plan that finishes, right? My goal is to wean off as much of those plans as possible so that by the time we graduate, we have as little going on in a plan as necessary, because the world outside of high school doesn't care really if you had a 504 or an IEP. The world outside of high school is going to take a look at, can you do the job or not? Or in college, can you do the work or not? I definitely, if someone's going to start with, I'm really anxious being on camera, great. Let's turn the camera off at first then, because I at least want you in school, and I at least want you listening, and I at least want you learning. And then we're going to create goals, which will be, now you're going to be on camera for 2 minutes per class, right? And that's how we're going to start for this week. And next week it's going to be 3 minutes, and next week it'll be 5, and then next week it'll be 10. And we're just going to slowly and gradually build it up until over the course of the semester, you're going to be on camera for the entire time. Because I always say this to families who sometimes say to me, well, we're hoping by the time they're done with high school, they're going to outgrow this. Well, that doesn't happen. That's not the way stress and anxiety works. You don't outgrow it. You outbehave it, right? You behave yourself out of being anxious. And the only way to behave yourself out of being anxious is to actually go and do things that are anxiety provoking and learn that you can handle them. So imagine then you've gotten out of high school and you've never been on the screen, and now you have to do a job interview, and it's going to be over Zoom or something like that, and they say to you, could you turn your screen on? And you say, well, no, I have a real anxiety about turning my screen on, but I've just interviewed 10 other people who all had their screen on. I'm going to go with the 10 other people at least who had their screen on, and pretty much right away eliminate the person who didn't have their screen on. So we want people to again, take a look at, where are we starting on these programs, 504s and IEPs. But again, let's hope we don't end there. Let's try to get out of high school with as little need for them as possible, because we want to wean off of those things over time so that by the time that we graduate, we're functioning hopefully as almost or nearly as well as people who don't have those programs.
Well, and I think that this can be helpful for you parents out there to think about what your goals are for your children and adolescents in terms of what are some concerns you have for them. Many parents will say things to me like, my child doesn't, order when we're in restaurants, or my child is too, has a really hard time talking to friends or reaching out or asking for help. And as a parent, think about how you respond to that, because so often we jump in and we intervene and we do those things for our children because we want them to be comfortable. But if our goal is to teach them how to be uncomfortable, are we really being helpful in those moments? So think about how you allow your child to have opportunities to be uncomfortable, or do you tend to kind of jump in?
Yeah.
And
Well, I'd say this, if your goal is to never have your child be uncomfortable, they shouldn't walk, right? Because imagine when they started walking and they fell the first time and they cried, you'd be like, oh my gosh, you fell? Oh, well, that's awful. That's horrible. You look very uncomfortable. Let's keep you crawling the rest of your life so that you'll never stand again. And that way you can never fall again. You can never bonk your head again. So you're going to look really weird in 6th grade crawling around the whole school, but at least you're never going to fall. And now I don't have to worry about you being uncomfortable from falling or riding a bicycle or anything else. I mean, there has to come a point where if, your kid doesn't order in a restaurant and it comes to them and the waiter or waitress says, what would you like? And after 10 seconds, they don't say anything. All right, we'll move on. You don't get to eat. Or everyone else is going to eat the restaurant, but you're not. And that's just the way that it is.
And I think, Patrick, you make some good points. I know Jackie and I, when we're working with families and parents in particular, we talk about, the kids being uncomfortable, but also for them to learn how to be uncomfortable watching their kids. So like you're saying, both of them doing it at the same time, and it's, the focus has to be both. And I think some parents really struggle with that at times, to kind of look at their own stuff of what really kind of triggers them. We will actually do hierarchy with parents of like what really gets in the way of your parenting. If I see my child sad, how do I react? If I see my child alone, if I see my child hurt, if I see, failure, what is it like for you? And I think making some really great points for the child and then also for the parents.
Sure. Well, or the one that I get then from parents, well, then they're going to threaten to kill themselves, right? They have no friends, they don't do anything. And anytime that we try to put a rule in, they either bust up the house, they break the door, or they say they're going to kill themselves. So then we give in. And now what has been taught, as long as I go to that level, I'll get everything that I want, which then means now I'm just going to automatically go to that level every single time. I consulted with a family just recently, and the mom said, our daughter rules our house, right? None of the other children can bring friends over because they might be contaminated, and therefore they can't have any friends, and all of us have to sit at a certain spot. She has her chair, no one else can touch it, and she has this bathroom. She doesn't let anybody else use that bathroom, so we're limited to these, and all these things. And I was just saying to her that, well, what if you violate these? Well, she starts to break things in the home, and she threatens to harm us, and then she threatens to hurt herself. I said, well, call 911. I mean, there's going to come a point where you're going to have to do that, or this is the way your home's going to be run for the rest of the time that she lives there. And because once anxiety is learned, it can get its way. It's not going to give up unless it's forced to, right? But you're not going to talk somebody out of being anxious. Never once in my entire career of 21 years have I said to somebody something amazingly rational, and then afterwards they said, oh, well, I guess I don't need to be afraid of that anymore. I mean, that's just not how it goes. We behave people out of being anxious. We don't talk them out of being anxious. And in fact, even if you look at the structure of the brain is designed in such a way that the anxiety center, which is in the midbrain, has absolutely no language ability whatsoever. So you can't actually talk to a person where they're actually experiencing anxiety, because the part of the brain that experiences anxiety has no language comprehension ability at all. It's purely emotional.
Well, I think that's true. One thing that, Patrick, you and I have talked about, which I think is so true, is sometimes it comes down to what is the expectations that the child has for him or herself, and what are the expectations the parents have. I was talking to kids today, and when a child's expectation is that everything's supposed to go well, then they're going to be anxious because there is a good chance it's not going to go well. And so, you will hear Patrick and I say, and Robin, that we never tell a child it's going to go great, or I know everything's going to work out for you. Things might be really difficult. How can you manage? And that's one thing I encourage you to say to your kids at home is, it sounds like that was difficult. What's the situation you faced in the past that was difficult, and how did you deal with it? Or, I've seen you deal with really tough stuff. And part of it is, I think we become so nervous as parents and as even educators that we want the child to be happy and comfortable. We so often use language that goes against really what we're trying to achieve. Like, oh, you'll be okay, or you look really anxious, or you're upset, what's going on? As opposed to allowing the child some space to kind of manage some of their feelings. We have a couple of great comments in the chat section, so I just want to go through some of them. I asked Patrick, what are situations that trigger anxiety for your child or adolescent? And definitely, I agree with some of these. Getting called on in class for an answer. Having to work out in front of the camera for gym, I have heard that one a lot. That is definitely one. We are definitely here with our teenage son as far as getting to that high level of now what. Eating food, which she is allergic to, making a mistake in front of others for sure. Getting online for classes on time, definitely, especially because we have some issues with internet, which is really difficult. My 18-year-old has social anxiety. So there's a lot, and these are very common. And I don't know if you want to touch on a couple of them at a time, and then I can go back and read the last ones.
Sure. So social anxiety, there's a book I like called Dying of Embarrassment that really can walk people through all sorts of exercises and tips of how do you
What's it called? I'll put it in the chat.
Dying of Embarrassment.
Okay.
And the idea, of course, being, well, we prescribe the problem, right? So if you're afraid of making mistakes, then we're going to purposely make a mistake. Right? We're going to do something. One of my favorites, back when we were out and about doing things, I'd sometimes go to the mall with one of my patients, and we go into Sears, and we'd find the big Sears sign, and there'd be a person with a Sears name tag somewhere around that sign, and we'd walk up to them and we would say, "Do you know where Sears is?" And we would do that purposely just to get the reaction, and then we would say, "Oh, you're right, we're in Sears. Oh, thank you so much, we appreciate it." And then we walk away, right? And it would be hysterical for me. I mean, I thought it was funny as heck, but they would think, WGN News 9 top story: idiot walks into Sears and asks where Sears is. But that's not the case, right? So there's a lot of overvalued ideation in anxiety and stress, believing that everyone's paying attention to me, everything that I do goes on my permanent record, I have to be better than everyone else to be equal to everyone else. There's a lot of this, right? It's fine for everyone in the world to be here. I have to be here to be equal to them. If I'm here, I'm a failure. So for me to be equal to everyone else, I actually have to perform better than everyone else. Why? Because I'm special. The rules of the world apply to me differently than they do to everybody else. It is okay for others to be average. That is not okay for me. It's not acceptable. It's not adequate. It means I'm lazy. It means I'm stupid or something. I don't think that about anybody else who's lazy, but or who's average. But I might be seen that way if that was the case for me. And so a lot of this is violation of rules and getting people to purposely make mistakes and do things wrong and learn I can handle it. Sometimes in an assignment for school, I'll say, put a mistake in the very first sentence that you write for your first paragraph. And let's just get the mistake out of the way, because now you don't need to worry about making the mistake anymore in the paper. You've already made it. It's already done. And that's just the way it's going to go. So little things like that can be very helpful to people to get them to sit with their discomfort about whatever it is they're afraid of, and ultimately learn they can handle it. As you said earlier, you don't have to like it. It doesn't have to be comfortable. I never tell patients they're going to be fine or everything's going to be okay. I've never said that to any patient I've treated. I say to people, you have to learn how to handle it.
Yeah, Patrick, and this is something I know I learned from you a long time ago, talking about the difference between the possibility and probability. Mm-hmm. And I think about like the one that person that had it in the chat room, that my child may eat something that they're allergic to. Mm-hmm. And if you do have allergies, there is, that is a possibility. Yeah. Sure. But I think a lot of times when we're anxious, we go if it's possible versus probable. And do you want to speak a little bit more on that? Because I think people really like when I bring that into the conversations, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Possibility versus probability is a huge thing, because in the anxiety world, if something is possible, it's 100% probable. And the problem, of course, is that many, many, many things are possible. So it is possible that a child will eat something that they are allergic to. So we could spend all of our time following them around constantly, making sure that they're never going to do that. But then we have to decide at what age do we cut that off? Is it 10? Is it 14? Is it 47? When do we finally decide, now I'm not going to be around you anymore to make sure you don't eat things? Or do you do a great education about saying, hey, now remember this. If you're ever at a friend's house and they offer you food, what do you say? No, thank you, because I have food allergies, and my mom has always said that I shouldn't eat food at other people's homes because we don't know what the ingredients are, because if I have something that I'm allergic to, it could be very harmful. What a lovely answer. Great. And then, you know what? Send your kid over to other people's houses and call the house ahead and say, hey, ask him if he wants some food, and make sure that he or she gives that answer every single time, right? And then maybe have have a party, right? And you, mom, you can make all the food, but pretend like other moms brought it, right? So put it out in what looks like different dishes or with a label on it. Mrs. Jane brought this, and Miss Smith brought this, and Miss Tony brought this, or whatever like that. And then say to the kids, all right, everybody, it's snack time. And watch if your child goes up to the table, or have you trained your child to say, hey, mom, there's snacks. Which one would be appropriate for me to eat? Okay? And if you're not there, hey, mom, who's a trusted adult that I could ask about ingredients for something? If you go through those, you train that, then you can allow your child to go out with some more confidence, and you're comfortable, and your child has confidence as well in these types of situations as well too. And you normalize it, right? It's not shame or anything like that. It's totally normalized, and it gets people to learn how to handle these types of situations.
But I think, kind of, Patrick, what you just said is, I think we need to model for our kids too how we manage anxiety. So think for a moment how you manage stress and anxiety. And if you find that you struggle with that, think about this, because I've talked about this before. We model for our kids how to manage and really identify, when you're around them, of a difficult situation you had and how you managed it. I had something today and it was really hard. But this is what I did, or God, I totally fumbled this whole thing today and then I got back up. Because for a lot of kids, I even tell them that it's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about learning how to effectively bounce back. And it's interesting. I had a 19-year-old girl say to me tonight when we were in session, she said, well, I told my friend she's not going to succeed unless she can learn to be flexible. And I thought that was so funny because the young lady is not super flexible, but I thought it was interesting that she's learned that if you really want to be successful, you have to be flexible, learn how to take risks and challenges, and learn how to make mistakes and do it day in and day out, because our kids have got to get great at failure. Because how many of you have failed at least once today at something? Mm-hmm. Anybody? So, I think especially during this time, when I was talking to high schoolers earlier today, we might have to shift our expectations during e-learning. If you have a child that is a perfectionist and really overdoes it, they might have to shift their expectations, because part of anxiety is when you don't have realistic expectations, it quickly gets overwhelming. So think about where your child is in terms of strengths and weaknesses, and really embrace both. Avoid the labels of you're so bright or you're so anxious or my child's just so shy, or you don't want to use the word anxious to describe your child. And if you find yourself introducing your child to friends or even describing your child to family members and saying, my child's anxious, you want to be mindful of that, because that's going to really kind of put them into a corner.
Yeah. We've got a question here, and it kind of goes right into what Jackie's talking about. And one thing I was thinking, Jackie, as you were talking, the perfectionist who, wants it to be perfect, but also, that very black and white thinking, also those individuals who can't tolerate failure. And I think they can look totally different, and recognizing when you've got kind of this all or nothing. So the question is, Patrick, what if your kid refuses to make that mistake, to get past the social anxiety? How do you get them there to even attempt to purposely make that mistake?
Easy. So I'm going to just make an assumption here that there's a lot of screen time and a lot of alone computer gaming and things going on. And so you basically say this, all right, here's the deal. You spend now about 6 hours a day on the screen. So here's what we're going to do. I'll give you 3. You can earn up to 3 more by doing these things, and you can lose up to 3 more by not doing these things. So it's your decision. What do you want to do? And we just kind of do a reward consequence program. Now, when I say that, we're not consequencing somebody because they have anxiety. We're going to give rewards for challenging anxiety, and there will be consequences for choosing not to challenge anxiety. Anxiety is now an uninvited guest in our home, and therefore we're going to do whatever it is that we can do to help kick it out of the house. And how will we kick it out of the house? We will reward all of the behaviors that get in its way, and there will be consequences for doing behaviors that keep inviting it back into the home.
Well, and I think that that's a really good point, Patrick, because I think, for many of our kids, we want to send them a message that we believe you can manage. And that's, many parents will say to me, my child lacks confidence. And when you really think about it, we gain confidence by doing things that are difficult and getting up. And so I encourage you, if you do really are concerned about your child's confidence, and this is one exercise Robin and I have done, and I've learned a lot from this, and that's why Robin and I are here, actually, because we love working with parents, and we actually learn a lot every time we do. But I had to challenge myself with my two kids, and I had to stop when they were in their late teens, and I had to ask myself, because I recognized I treated each of them different in a small way. Like, I responded differently to each of them. And I challenged myself to think for a moment, how am I thinking about each of them? So I challenge you to think about, how would you, in a few words, describe each of your kids? And so often you'll hear me say, I do believe we respond to our kids based on how we view them. So if you have a child and in your mind you view them as really anxious and really shy, you may have a tendency to feel sorry for them more, to really worry about them more, to kind of develop a belief that they can't handle a lot. And you may have another child who you really view as more strong, can deal with anything, and you tend to throw more at them. And again, this may not be true for every one of you, but for me it was true. And so I really had to challenge myself that I had to shift how I was viewing each of them, and I had to shift how I was responding, because it wasn't always helpful when I was responding out of emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so as Patrick's talking, think about how you respond to each of your kids. And do you have a tendency to emotionally react and feel nervous, or feel like you want to step in? Maybe they don't have a lot of friends. Maybe they've been bullied. Maybe there's been a tough situation in the house. Maybe there's a lot of reasons we really worry or feel bad for our kids. And we want to be sensitive and compassionate to our kids 100%. What Patrick's talking about is not parenting out of anxiety, not responding out of our fear that they're not going to be okay, but thinking about, what are our goals for them? What are we trying to teach them through our parenting? Are we trying to teach them to develop confidence and manage taking risks? And part of it's going to be in the language we use.
Right. I like to say to parents, did you have children so that they would live in your basement at age 40? Or did you have children so that they could, go out and live a life, and hopefully, you guys have great family visits later on or whatever. But I'm thinking you probably didn't have children with the goal of them just kind of staying down there. Or sometimes I've also said to families, I'll pull up really close to them. I'll say, no, let me get this straight. Your child lives in your home and does not pay rent, does not pay for the car insurance, does not pay for food, does not pay for internet, does not pay for electricity, no cable payment. You pay their car note, their car insurance, all of these things. Oh, and you buy them all their food and cook them all of their food as well too. And they also intimidate you anytime that there's a suggestion that they do something difficult. Okay. So sometimes I'll pull right up to the camera, or if I'm live, I'll pull my chair and I'll say, I'm just wondering, when can I move in? Because it sounds wonderful. I too would love to live in your home and have everything that I want given to me with no responsibility in return whatsoever. And if you even try to establish any, I can intimidate you to get you to back off and make sure that you leave me alone and continue to give me everything I want. And when I do that, parents kind of take a step back and look at each other and just think, crap, that's our life, right? And that's what we have done. We have made it as if our child has about this much tolerance of anything uncomfortable, and that's where we've gone, right? And now the slightest little thing that's difficult triggers a massive reaction. And what does the family very often do? Back down, because it's just easier to give in than it is to fight, to call 911 or anything of that nature. And so we have to reverse that. We have to change that. And we have to start getting people doing things that are uncomfortable. And we have to reward that. And we have to establish consequences for choosing not to.
Right. I call it embracing, sorry, Jackie, I call it embracing that anxiety. Instead of looking at it as we've got to get rid of it, let's embrace it and say it's very functional, and by embracing it, it actually then diminishes, right?
Yep.
And we're able to manage it in a much better way.
Yeah,
Jackie, go ahead, and then we've got a good question.
I was gonna actually bring up a couple of the points, but I was gonna say before I even ask this question, I'm gonna say that we all have different temperaments.
Yeah.
So you might have two kids and one child does have more what you may call more of a kind of a quiet temperament or an anxious, and one might be more outgoing. We all have different personalities and different makeups. Yeah. So that's definitely true. And when I look at both my kids, I would say my younger one had more of that kind of anxious temperament. And so I'm saying that because a couple of the comments talk about what about kids who define themselves by their anxiety. That's just the way they am, or I'm just more anxious than other kids. And I definitely have seen that where children and adolescents will say, well, I'm just anxious, that's just me.
Yeah, and you may be more anxious than other kids, but just because you are doesn't mean that you have to stay that way, right? You can still be trained. You may start off as not being as good of a basketball player as everyone on the team, but by the end of high school, be the best player on the team. What if for all of us, for our entire lives, the thing we identified ourselves at the beginning of the journey is what we were then forever? We would all be the same. No one would ever change. No one would ever improve because we would all only be what we think we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of it is, like Patrick said in the beginning, typically when people are anxious, they can engage in very black and white thinking. This will never work. Everything will go wrong. And part of what we do is we really work with them on challenging those thoughts. What is the evidence for that thought? And it takes practice. So you can behave your way into feeling different. Part of it is being mindful of how we as parents and even educators respond. Anxious kids develop a belief that I'm just anxious because everyone around them responds to them like they're kind of in a bubble. And so part of it is us coming to them and saying, hey, you made a mistake. That was awesome. I'm okay with you being uncomfortable, but the expectation is still the same as your sister that you order a dinner or whatnot, being it in steps. And I love Melissa's comment. We love making purposeful mistakes with our little ones. We put ideas on paper in a hat and pick one out each day.
Great.
And my favorite is to spill our drink all over the place. My toddler liked coloring on the table with washable marker, then cleaning it up. No big deal. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Mistakes. I think it was, I remember a song from Sesame Street, and the chorus was, oops, I made a mistake, that's all. And mistakes can happen to everyone. Everyone makes mistakes. And, it's a lesson to learn early on. Now, there may be some kids born with a temperament that is just, no, I have to get everything right, or I have to be better than everyone else, or those types of things. And so that can also be taught by people that, we believe you have to do it. I remember I had a kid that came to see me, failed everything his junior year of high school. He was a genius level IQ. I mean, just one of the smartest people I'd ever met. And he was so afraid to turn something in because if he didn't get an A+, it was an F to him. And his mom had said to me in the second session, well, I went to Harvard Law School, so he obviously is going to be going to Harvard Law or medical school. And so we've got to fix this thing so that he can get into Harvard. And this kid had so much pressure on him that even though he had the ability to do it, he had put so much pressure on himself that was interfering in his ability to actually do it. So just because you can do it doesn't mean you're going to do it. And just because you can't do something right now doesn't mean you won't be able to do it in the future either, right? This is not locked in and cemented in at a certain age. We have the ability to change and to adjust and to refocus and get better, but we also have the ability to get worse at some things as well too. So whatever it is that we don't practice kind of falls off, and whatever it is we practice stays with us. So if we practice perfectionism, then that's going to be more and more interfering in our life over time because it's the only thing that we practice, right? So we have to take a look at what is it that we're practicing, because practice makes routine. The more you practice something, the more likely you are to do that thing again in the future.
Right. I always tell, my perfectionists when I'm working with them, that actually slows you down. And if you're wanting to get this done, yeah. Right, because the perfectionism really slows you down.
Yeah. My imperfect essay is going to get handed in much earlier than your perfect one. Yours might even get handed in late and you lose a letter grade. And I do better than yours because my imperfect essay was on time, and it really wasn't all that imperfect, but it wasn't to your level of perfection, which in your all or nothing thinking, if it's not perfect, it's an F, right? Well, guess what? I got an A and you got a B because you handed it in a day late. So my imperfect essay just beat your perfect essay.
What?
What, Jackie?
I want to ask you to repeat that, Patrick.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
I got it.
You just yelled out, what?
You lost me in imperfect.
What? Well, Robin got it. So
I got
it. I got it. And that's many of the kids, and I don't know how many of you have high school kids, I think the hardest part for some of our adolescents too is just that, I haven't got to take my standardized tests. Like, I'm so nervous, what's going to happen? Am I going to get into college? Is this going to screw my chances at life? And many kids will say, I'm just so worried about not being successful, or I'm so worried I'm going to be a failure. And we talk about, like, you're only 7. How can you be a failure?
Right.
But we hear this all the time. And, we're hearing it from younger and younger kids of they're just so stressed out. And if you have children that are super stressed out with the e-learning right now, kind of put it in perspective. This is new for all of us. We know that it's going to be challenging. How do you really help them tap into what do you do when things are difficult? How do you manage? Avoid overly reacting. If you feel like you're really starting to lose it, walk away and take a break. The good thing is no one's ever died from anxiety. Feelings have a beginning, middle, and an end. And they truly do pass, but so often we react the minute they become intense.
Yeah. There's also the idea in anxiety of thought action fusion, right? And the idea that a thought is as bad as an action. So if I think it, it's as if I did it. So even thinking about goofing up is as bad as goofing up. So sometimes then we become afraid of our thoughts even about something, and our own thoughts scare us before we even make the attempt to do something. So there's just another thing in there that can kind of be a part of that. So.
The other thing,
Oh, sorry. Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting as you're talking about that, because when I'm working with someone and we make a hierarchy, and maybe you can kind of describe that to the parents, Patrick, and then we look at what the avoidance rating is, I also ask them, how often do you think about this? And I think it's as equally important to recognize that if I'm thinking about it, and maybe the avoidance isn't there yet, but I'm going to kick in if I have a lot of thought, if I'm really ruminating on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the power that we give our thoughts is amazing for some people, right? I mean, we believe that thoughts are truths, right? And they're not. So parents' worry comes into play a lot, right? When parents are worried about their kids, then whatever their worst case scenario they think about their kid is going to come true because they've thought it. And, why else would I think it if it wasn't true, type of thing. So we just always have to kind of pay attention to what is it that we're thinking? What is it that we're focusing on? But just because we are thinking it or focusing on it doesn't mean anybody else in the world is, even cares about it, for all that much matter too.
There is one question, Patrick, about what suggestions do you have for kids when their anxiety significantly impacts their sleep? Sleep is so important.
Well, sleep hygiene, I think, is great. So let's take a look at a couple of things. Number one, for kids, bed is for sleeping. That's what it is. So there's no games in the bed. There's no phones in the bed. There's no TV watching while you're in the bed. You go to bed and you sleep, right? Because if you associate all those other things with being in bed, then it's hard to also now associate sleep with bed too, because you've associated so much other stuff with bed. So you have to just really make a pretty steadfast rule in the home that says you're only in bed if you're going to sleep or take a nap. If you're going to be doing homework, if you're going to be reading, if you're going to be playing a video game or anything like that, it can't be in your bed. That's just a house rule.
Anything, Patrick, about just setting up the nighttime routine or things like that can help with sleep? Because a lot of kids we work with, when they go to bed, they lay down, all their anxiety, other anxious thoughts kind of flood.
Yeah. Well, you can have screens go off at a certain time and maybe give like a half hour before bed so that people just have some time to decompress a little bit from all the stuff that's going on. There's so much information flying at people all the time as well. And that last half hour before bed, as you're flipping through social media or something, could be something that you see and it's just really triggering. And now you're going to bed with that thought in your head and everything. So I like to say, half an hour before bed, screens are off. Some families do all right, it's remote charging time, and everybody puts all their stuff on a charger all in one space, and it's locked away for overnight so that everything can charge together. And that's going to help a lot. Watch for a growing safety-seeking behavior or reassurance-seeking that happens at night. If tonight it's "I love you," and tomorrow night it's "Hey Mom, I love you," and "Dad, I love you too," and then the next night, "Hey Mom, I love you," "Hey Dad, I love you," kiss on your cheek, kiss on your cheek, and then the next night, "Hey Mom, I love you," "Hey Dad, I love you," kiss on your cheek, kiss on your cheek, rub me on the head. And it just every night one more thing gets added to it. Well, after a while, you've got an hour-long ritual that has to go through in order to go to bed. And if you don't do it all exactly in the right direction or order, it's got to start all over again and kind of go again as well, too. So kids can establish some of these safety-seeking behaviors, these rituals, right? These maybe compulsions, if it's the beginning of something like obsessive compulsive disorder, and start to believe that if I don't do these things, something really bad's going to happen. And you can see why people could be very stuck in their head now, because after a while we become afraid of our own thoughts or the images that pop in our head or the urges that we have. And we think that if we don't do something to neutralize them, then that thing could come true or be real, and it would be my fault, and that would be bad or awful, horrible. It's the step on a crack, break your mama's back kind of thing. What if that were actually true? And maybe I should just do something to go and neutralize it right away to make sure it isn't actually the truth.
So Patrick, go ahead, Jackie.
I think sometimes we just end up responding to our anxiety, and we develop a routine, and the routine may not always be helpful that we develop. So routines can be healthy, and they can also be counter-effective. So you might, for instance, I used to be, and I share this story, I used to be terrified of public speaking. And Robin knows this, I would get sick to my stomach. If somebody had to sign up for a speech, they would put out the calendar and it would be September, October, all the way through June. Well, I signed up for the June one, and then I spent the whole 10 months worrying about it every time I saw the speech come up. And one of the things I know, when I was anxious about giving the speech, I believed in my head that I had the worst anxiety in the world, and I would never get better, and I would never be able to give a speech, and on and on and on. And I would do the same things every time I got nervous that were equally not helpful, but I would just keep doing them over and over. And for whatever reason, for 15 years, I did a bunch of unhelpful stuff that never got me anywhere. So finally, one day, I realized I had to start putting myself out there and just practicing doing it, even though I sucked. And I had to get really comfortable with criticism, right? People actually came up to me and they're like, "Man, you suck." And I was like, "Oh, Robin, they said I suck." Oh. But our kids really struggle with criticism.
Yeah.
Our kids struggle with feedback. And so part of it is teaching them how to deal with feedback, try to teach them how to the purpose of it. But I'm not nervous about presentations because I've done so many. I speak now in front of thousands of people, and it doesn't bother me. But I had to get over it, and somebody had to tell me to kind of get over myself.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories, but it's one of the saddest stories, though, too, that I've worked with, was a woman who came to see me 2 weeks before her college graduation. And she said, "I'm graduating with a major I hate, and I have a job waiting for me that I have no interest in whatsoever." I said, "Well, how did that happen?" She said, "Well, I came to this university because it's one of only 10 schools in the country that has the major that I wanted to major in." "Why aren't you majoring in that?" "Well, I did my first semester freshman year, and as I was flipping through the course book to pick classes for second semester freshman year, I was just looking at all the required classes for that major. And as I looked them up, I saw that in my senior year, second semester, which was where she was at when she came to see me, I was going to have to take a class, and in that class, there would be a 5-minute speech requirement as part of the passing of the class. And I am so afraid of doing public speaking that once I saw that, I started flipping through the course book until I found a major that required no classes with speeches, and I signed up for that major. And so now I've wasted 3.5 years and $120,000 in tuition to major in something that I don't like and have no interest in, all to avoid a 5-minute speech." And I said to her, "Okay, that's awful, number one. But number two, didn't you go to high school?" She said, "I did." I said, "Didn't you take speech classes?" She said, "I did." "How'd you get through it?" "Well, every teacher either let me write the speech and hand it in, or let me record the speech at home and bring a tape in, or they let me do the speech after class to just them." And I said to her, "Well, then every teacher failed you. By you never facing the thing you were afraid of and learning that you can handle it, you are now in the position that you're in right now, because nobody ever pushed you and had you kind of break through those boundaries that you've established, that I can't give speeches, which is what you brought to college. And when you saw that there was a speech coming, you still held that mindset that I can't do this. And it's not that you can't do something anxiety provoking, it's why won't you do something anxiety provoking? I can't treat, you can't do it, but I can be very helpful to, I won't do it. Why won't you do it? Because I'm afraid. Well, that's what I specialize in, helping you not be afraid of things anymore.
We have a great question. How does a parent neutralize assurance-seeking behaviors when it happens?
So one thing that I do in families is I suggest that the families start a worry journal. So what I want you to do is get a notebook, and I want you to have that notebook sitting on the dining room table. And if your child asks you a question more than once, more than one time is reassurance seeking. So if they ask you a question more than once, I want you to write down the question in the notebook, and then I want you to write down the answer in the notebook. And anytime in the future they ever ask you that question again, all you do is say, oh, that's in the notebook. What else you got going on? And you just very nonchalant, don't discuss that anymore, because it's only in the notebook that you go for it, and you don't have that discussion about that same question ever again. Because there's a couple of things with reassurance. Number one is, I want you to tell me it's going to be fine or okay, because if something goes wrong, then I get to blame you, because the only reason I did it was because you said it was going to be fine. I would never do it on my own, but thank you for telling me to be fine, because now I get to blame you. Or number two, if you give me an answer a little bit different today than you gave me yesterday, now I can pick apart the two answers and say, wait a minute, yesterday you said this, but today you said this. Does that mean you don't really know the answer? And now that just opens the door for us to debate for hours more about what the actual answer to this thing might be, because you've given me now two different answers to the same question. Well, I don't want that to happen anymore. So write down the answer after you've written down the question in the notebook, and always just refer back to, that's in the notebook.
Excellent. I like that. I even suggest that for parents when, we're working with parents, Jackie and I, we will have the parents to make that notebook too, as they've asked the same question over and over again. Yeah. And so they start to come up with, okay, this is how I'm responding. I think a lot of times when those parents were sending kids back to school after going through the school anxiety program, and then they would suddenly call you and they were in that freak out moment, and we've handled this before, how have you handled it? And so the notebook really helped, and they weren't dependent on me. They could figure it out on their own. And that's really, as you're talking, as clinicians, that's what we're working for, is for the individual really to be able to manage and do it on their own versus kind of depending on us. And that's what parenting is about, right? It's about really building those independent kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Resiliency. That's what we want, right? We want a resilient kid who can celebrate when they do well, and can also celebrate when they don't do well, because they've learned something from it, so that they hopefully continue to see continuous performance improvement going forward.
Yes.
And part of that's allowing your child to be resilient, right? So
and to fail.
My kids are 21 and 22, and I will tell you they're doing pretty well right now. But there were many times where they were growing up where I looked at each one of them and thought, holy crap, I screwed this one up. Mm-hmm. So it's a reality. Like, if your child's like having a hard time, have some faith in the process that you two are, or you as a family are going to be able to work through it. I've worked with so many families where the parents just were like, I just don't think this child's ever going to make it. I don't think this child's going to be successful. I don't think we're going to get through this. And then a year later, they're in a different spot. Part of it is we can't ride the wave with our children. So if our children are struggling, we can't move into that, holy crap. We have to really bunker down and be calm and be that voice of reason. And it's easy. So we encourage you tonight, if you feel like as a parent, you really struggle with your parenting, with your emotional kind of being, and that's common right now, seek help, reach out, because now's the time to really work on how we respond to our kids is key. And if they start to really struggle and we have that face on that, oh my God, this is not going to be okay, they're reading that off of us, and they will rise up when we hold them accountable. And so part of it is learning how, even if you have an anxious child, to set some expectations. And as Patrick said in the beginning, they may say things like, if you make me go to school, I'm going to hurt myself. Or if you take away my video games are my life. I'm not going to have any friends. Part of it is going back to, well, that doesn't sound very healthy. What could you do different, or how are we going to manage this? Because we cannot go on like this.
Yeah. Jackie, I've always loved in your talks too, when you say, if you're on a plane, always watch the flight attendant, right? If they're screaming for their life, you're all in trouble. But if it's really turbulent and they're just like, would you like coffee or tea? Then, well, I think that they're a good model for something like that. And that's how we want parents to be too. It may be really turbulent in our lives, but how does a parent kind of remain calm in the storm and be a good example for everybody else in that situation?
And I think a lot of individuals do not recognize they have this skill already because they do this at work. Because if they were throwing a fit in the middle of work, it wouldn't be lasting very long. So you have that skill. How do we transfer it into the home? And 100%. So sometimes, right, it's not about learning a new skill. It's about adapting. How can you do it when you're in the situation with your kids?
Yeah. I say to people all the time, I say, well, I can't accept uncertainty. I mean, I have to know what the answer is going to be in this situation. I say, all right, well, if you could sign the title of your car over to me and then give me the keys, because every time you drive, you don't actually have certainty that you're going to get where you're going without having an accident or dying. So I'm going to assist you in your desire for having absolute certainty by removing your car from your life so that you don't have to ever worry about actually if you're going to make it where you're going or not. So thank you for the car. Well, no, I have to drive. Okay, so that means that you do accept uncertainty in certain areas, but not in others. So it's not that you don't know how to deal with uncertainty. You just don't apply it to every area of your life. And we're here to figure out how to apply it better to other areas of your life where you're not applying it.
We've got another question, Patrick. It says, I struggle with being calm rather than frustrated and reactive when my daughter has a meltdown over minor things. Any suggestions for me? I assume it involves me taking a deep breath.
Well, it could. I'm a big fan of the 5-minute rule, that you don't have to engage your child while they're not being calm, right? You could walk away. Yeah. As weird as this will sound as a therapist, if somebody, let's say, is doing something in front of me that's a certain ritual or they're having a freak out or something, I'll do this sometimes. And after a while I'll say, just let me know when you're done. And then suddenly they're done. It's like, oh, okay, now let's go back to what we were talking about. And I just pay no attention to it anymore. I don't reinforce it anymore. But sometimes those things are purposely done just to get a rise out of other people and some reinforcement about other people. So I remove my reinforcement of those things from people just by turning around, or sometimes I'll just shut the camera off and say, yeah, just let me know when you're done. I'll be back. I'm going to go get a glass of water. So you can have your freak out. And then when I return, we can kind of go back to what it was that we were talking about. And I think that can be very helpful.
Well, part of it is, Patrick, it's because you're doing something different. If there's a behavior in your home that you want to change how you respond to it. Because, as Patrick says, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. Right. So I encourage you to think about, kind of just patterns. And we all have patterns in our home. And they just are, try not to be judgmental of your parenting. These workshops aren't for you to be judgmental or you to walk away and say, I'm doing something wrong. We're all here to learn new things, and parenting is not perfect. You're going to develop new strategies throughout, right. But think about different patterns that are existing in your home, especially with your child, and really start to think about how you respond. And if you do have a hard time and you become frustrated and reactive, part of that, and one little trick that I've always used is I try to ask myself, am I feeling emotional? And if I am, when in doubt, I try not to react, right? Because if I'm feeling really emotional, typically my reactions are going to come out of that. And we didn't have time tonight to talk about this, but one thing, we talk a lot about is writing things down, writing down your expectations for your child and how you are going to respond, or the privileges you are going to give them based on those expectations.
Yeah, refrigerator therapy. Write it down and put it up on the refrigerator, because you never want to get in an argument with someone and say, no, that's not what we agreed to. We said this. No, you don't want to do that, because that's going to be awful horrible. So
right. And I'm sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
I was just saying, before, I know we're done and I have another webinar at 7, so I have to get off right at that. But I just want to say, if people are interested, just the shameless self-promotion moment, I have a book out called Don't Try Harder, Try Different. And I did put in there how people can get a copy of it. And it has lots of these little stress management tips that we've talked about tonight are included in there. So if you're interested, you can take a look in the chat where I wrote the info about how you can get a copy of it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank everyone for coming tonight. Remember, you will need to register for all of these. We have another one coming up next week, and we're hoping that you'll
Who's
come
the
back.
guest next week? Who do you have? Any exciting guests next week?
Yes, we do, Jackie.
Well, you didn't show all our great slides, Robin.
Sorry, I did not go.
I don't think we showed any slides.
We showed no
whatsoever,
slides, man. Okay,
Excellent.
let's go. Okay, here's
Oh, it is Kristen.
Kristen
It's Kristen Schmidt. Oh, you
Kristen
guys,
Schmidt.
this is going to be a good one. This is going to be way better than the one we had tonight. Supporting your
whatever.
child with virtual and in-person learning. This is actually, this is Kristen Schmidt. She's the assistant director for 47. She's got awesome tips for just helping you with your child with e-learning, dealing with the frustrations and all of it. She is amazing. And yes. That is awesome. So I'm excited, Patrick, as always. Hopefully I get to do another webinar with you soon. Maybe I'll jump on at 7 and do your 7 o'clock webinar.
Please, yeah. You can download the NOCD app if you have OCD or someone in your family does, and I do a webinar through the company I work for now called NOCD, NOCD, and you can go on Google Play or iOS and get that. So.
excellent.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, everybody. Good to talk to you. Thank you all for listening. Appreciate being here with everybody tonight.
Thank you. If there's certain topics you all would like, if there's certain topics you want us to bring in, we are going to be probably extending. So definitely feel free in the chat or to email Robin or I if there's certain topics you'd like us to cover during this parenting series. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great night.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.